What's up guys, I'm Ethan, your real-life English fluency coach, and in today's lesson, we're gonna go deep. I'm gonna try to give you some different motivations that maybe you haven't thought about in the past. They're gonna help propel you forward in your English learning. So if you watch this video until the end, you're going to learn the powerful way to add purpose to your English learning so that you don't give up. You're going to learn why English is the most important language in the world and probably why it's one of the most important things that you can possibly learn. You'll also learn, of course, the #1 reason to learn English, and finally, also how you can use your English to make the world a better place. So we're gonna jump into all of that in just a second, but first I want to let you know that if you are new here, every single week we make lessons like this one so that you can understand fast-speaking natives, you can be understood by anyone, and connect to the world. Just like Zhang, who says that our lessons are helping him to overcome his fear of speaking and speak English confidently. And you can too. Join us by hitting that subscribe button and the bell down below, and you won't miss a single one of our new lessons. So this is a concept that was popularized by a guy named Sinek, who through a ton of research about different companies, about companies that were really successful, he found as a unifier that they started with why. Now, what does this mean exactly? Let me give you an example. This is one of the ones that you'll hear from him most common, and that is with computers. Now, when you're shopping for a computer, often you'll see different companies telling you, we have the computer that works the fastest, it's the most powerful, it's the newest technology. But when you look at Apple, which Apple has really created a cult following around its brand, they have a completely different way, or at least they used to have a completely different way of marketing their computers. They started with why. So all those other companies were starting with what? Having the fastest computer, having the most powerful, the best technology, and Apple started with why. Now maybe you remember this if you've seen any old Apple commercials, but they would say that they wanted to help you to think differently. Now, people who use Apple computers, who have an iPhone, who have any sort of technology from Apple, do it because they're the kind of person who thinks differently. They're part of that counterculture. Now, this was immensely successful for Apple, and it really set them apart and allowed them to do things that didn't seem like they would make a lot of sense for most computer brands, like, for example, creating a cell phone. Now, Sinek has an incredible TED Talk. I highly recommend that you check it out if you want to learn more about this, and we'll link that down in the description below. But you're probably asking yourself right now, why is this relevant to me? Like, I don't have a company, maybe you're not an entrepreneur, but this doesn't apply just to companies. You can use this yourself. You can create a really powerful why for your learning English, which is going to help to set you apart from most people out there who have really superficial reasons for why they're learning English. Now, this is so important that I used to have all of my students actually do an exercise to help them discover their own why for learning English. And I'll tell you more about that and how you can do it in a little bit. Now, you might be wondering, what is even the reason to do this? How's it going to help me? Now, most people, when they think of learning English, they think of it as something that they have to do. Now, think of anything in the past that you've had to do. Maybe when you were younger, chores around the house, your parents would make you take out the trash, or they tell you you have to do your homework, your teachers would tell you that you have to study this, and probably those things weren't things that you really wanted to do. You probably didn't really care about them. They probably didn't make you feel very passionate. However, when you shift your attitude, it allows you to take your motivation to a completely different level. And that is why this is so important. When you discover your why, that's going to be the thing that pushes you forward, that lights a fire inside you, that makes you passionate about learning it. So you're going to change from thinking, I have to learn English, to I want to learn English. I love learning English. It's the most important thing in the world to me. Now, every single person's why is probably going to be pretty unique to them. And there can be different levels of whys that maybe are more deep or maybe more superficial. Now, most people out there probably are thinking that they have to learn English, or even they want to learn English because they need it for professional reasons. And there's nothing wrong with this. Of course, it can be really great if you are ambitious. It can be very important to know English so that you can get a promotion or that you can start a successful company. But I think that there's also much better and deeper whys that you can have for learning English than this. The next level might be thinking about needing your English because you want to travel, because you're really interested for cultural reasons. For example, maybe you love French cooking and so you need to learn French so that you can understand different recipes that you want to cook. Or maybe it's because you want to form relationships, like you're going to go live abroad in an English-speaking country, or maybe just you want to make friends from other countries. But if we take it a level deeper, very few people out there will have kind of a concept of the impact that English fluency can have on human consciousness, on global interconnectivity, on the way that we perceive ourselves as a part of the world. Now, wherever you find yourself on the spectrum of motivations right now, that's completely fine. Really, your why for learning English can and should change as you're kind of progressing on your learning journey. Now, as I mentioned before, English can really have a huge impact on your global consciousness. And because of this, your purpose for learning English will evolve as you do. So all of that said, now I'll tell you about the exercise that I used to do with my students. So it's really super simple. You could even pause the video right now and do it, or if you want to continue watching, then you can come back and watch this part of it again. But really all you have to do is grab a piece of paper and a pen, and you're going to write down, why am I learning English? So basically, your first answer might be something that's maybe a little bit more superficial, a little bit more simple. So let's take, for example, that you said, I'm learning English because I want to get a better job. And then what you're going to do is you're going to ask yourself why 5 times, okay? So we have that original answer to the question, why am I learning English? Because I want to get a better job. So then we're going to ask why. So I want to get a better job maybe because I want to be able to provide a better life for my wife and children. And then you're going to ask yourself why again? Because I want them to be happy. And then you're going to ask yourself why again? Maybe so that they can have more opportunities in life than I did. And you can already see, just by doing this a few times, you've already got a much deeper response to why you're learning English. And this is probably going to be something for you that is much more motivating, that really lights a fire inside you, that gets you passionate about learning English, much more than just, I have to learn it because I want to get a better job. And then the final part of this exercise, once you've done that 5 whys and you've gotten to your final answer, you've gotten to something that gets you excited, that lights that fire in you, you're going to either take a picture of it or write it on a sticky note, and you're going to put it somewhere that you'll see it all the time. And the reason that you're going to do this is because when you're constantly coming in contact with this, it's going to help you to continue that motivation, to always feel inspired by it, and to come back to the deeper purpose for learning English. Now, I even had a student who actually took a picture of it and set it as the picture on his phone, so that anytime that he would look on his phone, he would actually be seeing his why for learning English, and that was just huge motivation for him in learning the language. So that said, now we can move on to why English is just so important. Now, why exactly is English so important? Why must you learn this language? Now, whether you like it or not, maybe this is already apparent to you, but English is the global language. So when you're learning English, you're not just learning to be able to communicate with Americans or with Brits or people from other English-speaking countries. You can be learning it for travel, like if you go to Germany or Brazil or Taiwan and you don't speak the local language, what language are you going to communicate with people in? English, right? Or for business, I believe it's about 80% of business interactions are between non-native and non-native English speakers. So if you want to be successful in business, it's super important that you're able to speak English, unless you're just maybe doing business in your corner of the world. But in a globalized world, more than ever, it's super important to be able to connect your business to other parts of the world. And naturally, for diplomacy, maybe you're interested in politics. So if you want to be able to get very far in a political career, of course you have to have impressive English. So what all this means is that for most people out there, having a native accent in English becomes less and less important. Now, if you really want to, then of course you can dedicate all the time and energy to that. But for most people, it's just not going to be that important as long as you're able to speak clearly and confidently. Now, that's not to say that being able to understand natives isn't still super important. Of course, if you want to be able to consume any sort of media in English, you're going to need to be able to understand natives even when we speak really fast. But I created another lesson talking all about connected speech and why this can make a huge difference in your ability to be able to understand natives even when we speak super fast. So I highly recommend that you check that out, and I'll link it down in the description. So maybe it's already pretty obvious for you that English is that key that you need to be able to communicate with people from anywhere in the world. But maybe another aspect that you haven't thought about so much is that English can open up a whole new world for you of different sources of information. So a great example of this is with the internet. Most of our information nowadays comes from the internet, right? Now, on the internet, there are about as many English-speaking users as Chinese-speaking users. But when we actually look at the pages on the internet, there are 17 times more pages in English than there are in Chinese. Now, the reason that this is so important is because all of a sudden, if you are able to understand English, you'll have all of these sources of different information, and it'll be much easier for you to find sources that aren't biased. Now, why this is so important is because maybe most of your life, if you watch the news or you consume any other information like that, all of it might be coming from just your local TV station, for example, in your local language. But once you actually start consuming more things in English, you might realize that a lot of the information that you've been getting throughout your life has kind of misguided you. It's been incomplete, or maybe it's been completely biased, or it's been lies altogether. And the reason that this happens is because in most countries, around 90% or even more of the media is controlled by the same people, who usually have a very specific interest that might not be aligned with your actual values. And they might be trying to manipulate you and people in your country in certain ways. So when you know English and you're able to understand a lot of different information out there and able to compare different sources, all of a sudden you are able to really get to the truth of different matters. But if you only speak one language, then you're just limited to that one point of view. Now, if you get far enough on your English learning journey, you start to connect with people in other parts of the world, you start to interact with different sorts of media and different points of views, it's inevitable that at some point you're going to have an aha moment. Now, if you haven't heard this term before, it means an epiphany, a sudden realization. I can still remember my aha moment. I can remember it crystal clear where I was and who I was with and what clothes I was even wearing. So when I was in high school, I actually studied abroad in Germany when I was about 17. And this was my first time really living outside of my country or even my home. So I was living there already, I think, for a couple months, and I was starting to get more comfortable with the German language. And I remember I was in the classroom having a conversation with some of my classmates, and I just had this sudden realization that the conversation we were having, the topic we were talking about, which I can't even really remember specifically what we were talking about, but it was something that I could have been having that exact same conversation with my friends back in the United States. And this was really incredible for me because all of a sudden I realized, people my age in Germany are pretty much exactly the same as people my age in the United States. There's not really that much of a difference. Now, I'd been kind of told all my life that, people over there, they're really different. People who aren't Americans, they're just not the same as us. We're the best in the world, or you need to be proud that you're an American, and all of this stuff. So kind of all of a sudden for me, it was like something broke open and I was able to see the world in kind of a different way. Now, this kind of, as I continued along my language learning journey and meeting different people from around the world, especially when it had become more and more easy with the internet, I started to really deepen this realization. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about that in just a little bit, but basically what I'm wanting you to take here is that when you start to consume different types of media or you start to make friends in other parts of the world, you're going to realize that people in other countries aren't that different from you, and that a lot of the things that you've been told by the media or other people, maybe even your family, maybe even the government, just aren't true at all about other people in other countries. When it comes down to it, we're all humans and we all have the same basic fears and needs and wants and dreams. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about global citizenship. Now, if you don't know what this term means, we're going to define it for you. If you already know what it means, maybe you're in doubt about what makes a global citizen. Am I a global citizen? How can I become a global citizen? So we'll answer all those questions. So I think a fantastic place for us to start talking about this is with something that's called the overview effect. Now, this is something that was probably identified around 60 years ago or so when humans first went to the moon. Now, basically, our goal was to go to the moon, to go discover this thing that's out there and to actually put our feet down on it. But that wasn't really the biggest discovery. The biggest discovery came when they were going out in space towards the moon, and they were spinning around and looking out the window. And at some point, they could see Earth hanging out there alone in the darkness of space. And it was unified. There were no borders. This was the first time ever that humanity was able to see Earth as something completely unified without any borders. And nowadays, it's not necessary that you go out into space in order to have this realization. Global citizenship lets us see the world beyond those imaginary borders. And of course, when you know English, it's going to help you a ton to be able to access this information and have this realization for yourself. Now, there is a fantastic documentary about the overview effect, about the astronauts that first went into space, and I highly recommend that you check that out. It's just 20 minutes, and we'll link that down in the description below. So global citizenship basically is a collection of the processes, skills, character traits, and attitudes that altogether form an identity that transcends the geographic and political borders to include all of humanity. And within these, there are certain global competencies that you can develop that will help you to be a better global citizen. So let's take a look at some of those. So one of the most important ones is non-judgmentalness and curiosity. Now, what does this mean? Basically, non-judgmentalness means that when you are talking to someone, instead of right away, because they said something that is weird or that's different than how you think, instead of judging that thing, you're going to become curious. You're going to ask questions about it. You're going to try to imagine, why do they think that way, or why do they act that way that's different than how you've been kind of brought up to act? So you're going to change your attitude, and you're not going to judge before you really know the truth. Now, another really super important global competency for this is empathy. Now, empathy is the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes, to kind of understand where they're coming from, how they feel. Now, this is much easier said than done. It's something that, if it's important to you, you're going to be developing it your entire life, because it's very easy to have reactions to other people and to not be able to take the time and the focus to be able to really understand how they feel. But when you are able to do this, it can have a profound change on your relationship with other people, especially as a global citizen, when you're interacting with people who come from different cultures, different religions, different national identities. Now, when you do this, you'll probably start to reflect on that, if I were to have been born in the same place that that person was born, I grew up kind of with the same opportunities or limitations or the same circumstances as that person, how would I think? I would probably think a lot like that person. I probably would have the same religion. I probably would have a lot of the same cultural beliefs or traditions. And so when you're able to start thinking in this way, all of a sudden you might see that, maybe my way of doing things isn't the best, or maybe it's not right. It's not so black and white. So it's not that I'm right and that person's wrong. I'm normal and that person's weird. You start to see that it's just different ways of experiencing the world. And in order to develop empathy in this way, a really important skill that, again, is much easier said than done is listening. Now, that might sound like really simple, but really to become a great listener is a huge challenge, because you need to be able to focus. You need to be able to kind of clarify the mind so that you're not thinking about, like, how am I going to respond, which the way that most people listen is by their thinking in their mind, okay, how am I going to respond to what this person's saying? But when you work on your listening, you're really present with that person. You're really listening to what they're saying, understanding them, really trying to feel their point of view. Now, a really great way to kind of cultivate these skills, of course, is through meditation or other ways that you can kind of create more focus and kind of empty the mind so that you're not so caught up and you're more present in the moment. And there's many more global competencies, but just to give you one more that I really love, it is called seeking the third way. Now, basically when you have any interactions with another person, especially if that person comes from a different place than you, then you're going to have different points of views. And usually when this happens, especially if you're discussing something, especially if you're having maybe some sort of debate or argument, you're going to come at it with those different viewpoints, and one person's going to think one way, the other person's going to think the other way, this person's going to think I'm right, they're wrong, I'm right, they're wrong, and you're going to have a clash there, right? But it's not so black and white. There's not just these two ways of seeing and doing things. There's always a third way. And so as a global citizen, you seek that third way. You look for that third way of doing things. You're able to come to a solution where you're both able to win, or at least you're both able to come to something that you're happy about. Now, as global citizens, we can use English to solve the huge problems that all of us are facing no matter where we are in the world. Now, one really important thing to do to start out is to stop seeing other people as they and start seeing it as we. So instead of thinking they're bad, they're wrong, they're weird, you start thinking, that we want a better world. We want a better future and life for our children. We can do this together. This involves moving past our petty differences. Now, this is a really great term if you haven't heard it before. Petty differences are kind of the small, unimportant differences. And when you start to kind of discover this viewpoint from global citizenship, you start to see that a lot of things like religion or cultural differences or race or other things really seem pretty petty when you compare it to what we all have in common as human beings. And when you do this, you're able to make space for all nations, for all religions and all cultures, and celebrate those differences. Now, it becomes super interesting to actually be able to learn about traditions that they have in other parts of the world, for example. And maybe you really like these ideas, you're really interested in being able to experience having conversations with people in other parts of the world so that you can develop your global competencies, so that you can become a global citizen. Now, in order to do this, it's really important that you build your global tribe. Now, a global tribe is basically a group of people from different parts of the world who share your values for global citizenship. Now, we have our community of global citizens, which is called the Fluency Circle. Now, this is a really amazing place, guys, because you go on there in the morning and you can talk to someone who is having lunch in India and they show you what they're eating there. And maybe you see also what someone was doing last night in Brazil. They had some tradition that they were celebrating. Or you talk to someone from Japan who is maybe showing you some photos from their trip to Kyoto. Now, lifetime access to the Fluency Circle is included with all of our courses, like the RealLife Native Immersion course, which is really fantastic if you're wanting to build your skills to be able to understand natives even when we speak really fast. And that, for example, might help you if you're wanting to be able to understand the news in English without getting lost. So you can actually try that for free with our Power Learning Week, which you'll find linked up here or down the description below. And now the other really amazing thing that happens when you become a global citizen is that not only are you going to kind of see the entire world for what it really is and start to value other perspectives, other cultures, but then you're able to turn back towards your own culture and have a completely different view of it. You're able to see it in a different light. Now, in my own experience, when I went to Germany for the first time, I remember I was actually really negative about the United States. I'd been told all my life, that the United States is the best country in the world, that you have to be proud to be an American. And I saw actually like a lot of things that were better in Germany. And I started to think, really the United States isn't all that great as I've been told my whole life. But actually, as I kind of got older, as I started to travel more, as I started to meet more people, I was able to value a lot more things in the United States that are really great. I was able to become more grateful about the things that really are gifts for me and the things that I really love about my own country and my own culture. So something that's really important here is that when you start to have this global perspective and discover other places in the world, that you're not becoming cynical or critical of your own place in the world and of those things that maybe seem too traditional or the lies or the kind of misguided things that you've been told during your life, but that you're able to kind of value both the good and the bad about that. Now, this all probably sounds pretty great to you, but I have to tell you, it's really one of the hardest things being a global citizen, because it's not like one day you're not a global citizen and the next day you are and you're a global citizen for your entire life. It's something that you have to constantly work at. You really have to build those competencies, you have to make it a habit, and you have to remind yourself about it all the time. I still struggle with this in my everyday life. And I think it comes down to pretty simple things. It's like when you are walking down the street and you see a homeless person, you kind of realize how grateful you are for the opportunities that you've had in your life, that you have a home, that you have family, that you have people around you who support you, who help you to learn English, who help you to be a better person. So I think it's really developing kind of that gratitude and that self-consciousness. Now, when you start to develop these skills, the really great thing is that you can use them and you can use your English to help to make the world a better place. Now, as we talked about, it's being more informed about how the world really is, not just what the media or people or your government tells you. Now, we already talked about how being able to experience other sorts of information is a really great way to do this. But another really fantastic way to do this is when you have your global tribe and you start to meet people from different parts of the world. If you hear something, maybe about another country, you're actually able to go to one of those people and ask them about it and kind of to discover the truth. So you kind of use your curiosity to really get to the truth of the matter and to really understand what's really happening around the world. Now, one example of this is in the United States. All the time we're hearing negative things about Russia because there's obviously a lot of conflict between the Russian and the American government. Now, kind of the sad thing that happens here is people hear this on the media and they start to think, you know, Russia's bad and Russians are bad, they're the enemy, they're really horrible, they're wrong, we're right. And what happens here is it kind of just creates a bigger and bigger divide. But when you have a different perspective, or even you just get the opportunity to talk to someone who's from that country, to ask them questions about it, to just really be curious and non-judgmental, you're able to see, like, this is a completely normal person. They maybe have a little bit different way of thinking, but they're not my enemy. They're a human being just like me. They have their dreams. They maybe have children that they're trying to create a better life for. And you start to see, like, really the deeper values here as human beings are very similar. So certainly as a global citizen, you always need to be kind of skeptical about what you're hearing about other countries and trying to be curious and discovering the truth by actually talking to people or by fully researching it. Now again, the Fluency Circle is a really fantastic place for this because, you know, anytime there's a natural disaster, we actually ask people how they're doing. We kind of care, you know, and make sure that they're okay. And if there's something happening, some sort of conflict or something interesting that we heard on the news, we'll actually ask them, is this really the case? Is this so true? And this is really fantastic because we have people from virtually every country in that group. So another way that you can make the world a better place through your English is to pay forward what you're learning. So when you kind of talk to other people about what's actually happening in their part of the world, or you're discovering it online by something that you're watching or reading, you can actually share that with your family, with your friends, and help them to kind of have similar discoveries. If you're enjoying this video, you could even share it with like another friend or family member or someone you know who speaks English, and then you could have a conversation about these topics. Now, everything we've talked about so far are things that on your own, every single person can do. Maybe you want to take it even further, so you can be the change that you want to see in the world. And there's so many different ways that English can help you to do this. So, for example, you could actually use your English to get different sorts of job opportunities, or you could volunteer. Maybe you could get a job at an NGO, that's a non-governmental organization, that's doing something really fantastic to bring about some sort of change in the world that's going to make it a much better place to live in. And you're going to be really proud of what you're working on. You're going to use your English every day. And maybe another thing that you could actually do is actually teaching English. Then you're going to help other people to have these same discoveries. So whether you want to do it professionally, or you just want to help someone in your family or a friend who wants to learn it, or just kind of providing them with resources even, then you're going to be really paying forward all of the discoveries that you're having through your English, through your global citizenship, to a whole other group of people. Now, right now is a really interesting time for global citizenship with everything that's been happening in the last 6 to 8 months with the COVID virus. Now, this is a really kind of difficult time for everyone all around the world, and more than ever, we can start to kind of see the importance of global citizenship. So no matter where you are, this is probably affecting you. And this really kind of shows us this need to take care of each other. So for example, again, in the Fluency Circle, when this was first happening several months ago, we were asking other people in other parts of the world if they were okay. So it's kind of like you had this sense that everyone was taking care of each other and everyone was undergoing these same kind of difficulties, and just this huge sense of empathy. So I think this is a really great time to start putting more energy into kind of these values, into kind of building your global tribe, and to being part of the solution. So we're almost finished, and I'm going to give you a challenge that I want you to take that's going to really help you with everything we've talked about today. But really the final thing that I want to leave you with is this idea that no matter what divides us, that which unites us is far greater. I think that's the biggest message that you can take away from this video. And really, to be a global citizenship is to apply what you've learned in this video to try to make the world a better place. All right, so as I mentioned, I have a challenge for you. So after you finish this video, what I want you to do is go down to the comments below and connect with someone from another part of the world there. Now, you could even agree to meet with that person on WhatsApp or Skype or something like that. And also leave a message if you're willing to connect with other people so that they can find you. I don't recommend though that you leave your number, your actual phone number, because that way anyone could contact you, but leave some other way that people can find you. So I started out this video talking about the importance of having a really strong why. Our why here at Real Life English is to create a world beyond borders, and I hope that you will join us in that mission. So we're actually developing an app now that's going to make it super easy to connect with English learners from other parts of the world and to practice together and to have these kind of cross-cultural discoveries and really to deepen your global competencies. So if you want to learn more about that, the easiest way would just be to subscribe down below, and we'll be sure to publish all sorts of information about that once it's available in a couple months. And now it's time to go beyond the classroom and live your English and be the change that you wish to see in the world. Aw, yeah. Hey guys, what's going on? So in today's lesson, I'm going to tell you the secret to being able to understand and even speak more like a native. So what is connected speech? Maybe you have heard this term before, but if you haven't, it's going to really revolutionize your English.